So the companies you mentioned, Gleb, Uber, Google, Amazon, of course, they're large, they are matrixed, and they're distributed workforces. They were before. A lot of people never met the person they, quote, worked with at Amazon before the pandemic, and they never will, right? So given those dynamics, and given as well the polarizing positions workers and leaders each have, what are some office strategies, rather return to office strategies that the rest of us should consider as we plan something different from what was before?
The main thing to think about is who gets to make the decision on returning to the office. So I've helped 14 companies transition strategically back to the office. And the best practices that I've found in working with these companies and observing others is that it's not the CEO who should make the decision. It's not individual workers who should make the decision. What should happen is that the CEO, the C-suite, should give broad guidelines to lower level team supervisors, team leads, and encourage them to make the decision. So broad guidelines for the companies that I helped for 13 out of the 14 chose mostly hybrid model. And one of them chose to do full-time virtual work. I would encourage a hybrid model because that helps teams collaborate better. So when you look at productivity, you see that productivity is generally higher for people who work virtually, who work remotely, about 10 to 14% higher, but it's especially higher on their individual tasks, the things that they do individually. They can do those very well from home. Collaborative tasks often are better done together in the office, especially more intense collaborative tasks. So what the leadership did at those companies that I helped transition back to the office is they gave guidance to team leads and said, okay, we're going to go to a mostly hybrid model, 1 to 3 days in the office. Decide for your team based on how much collaborative work you do. So using that guideline, how much time you should spend in the office and how much time people should spend at home. And if there are some people who are really want to work virtually full-time and who can be successful at it, then encourage them to allow full-time virtual work, even in teams that are otherwise coming in to the office 1 day a week or something like that. And by the way, by full-time virtual work, I do mean coming in once a quarter for a team building retreat. That's really important and valuable for that team building spirit. So that's the first step. This is who makes the decision and how you go forward. Once you do that, you want to change your office space. You want to figure out what's your usage going to be. So let's say you have people coming in on average of 1 day a week. Let's say that on average of 1 day a week. You have some people full-time remote, some people coming in 2 to 3 days, on average of 1 day. You probably need about 20% of your office space for basic fundamental functions like finances, leadership team offices, stuff like that. The rest of your office space is going to be dependent on capacity, so that 80%. That means that you can probably get rid of something like 60% of your office space and save a lot of money on these real estate costs. So that's great for you when you're thinking that. Then the rest of the office space, you need to transform it to be much more collaborative. Really transform it to have much more video conference space, informal lounges for collaboration. Do away with individual cubicles. You want to move toward a floating desk situation, hot desking, where individual teams have a couple of desks assigned to them or something like that, or they just take any desks, because people will not, when they come to the workplace, be doing their individual work. They'll overwhelmingly be doing collaborative work. Maybe they'll do a little bit, an hour of individual work between team meetings. So that's a second step. The third step you want to be thinking about is changing your performance evaluations. Your performance evaluations, the typical way it is they're done on the amount of time, the time that a person spends working, which is usually in the office. That's not great. That's not a great way of measuring people in a hybrid model, full-time virtual model. So you want to move away from that. You want to move toward, instead of measuring them based on their productivity, their accomplishments, their deliverables. And that involves not doing once a year annual large evaluation, but small evaluations every week, where the subordinate sends a team leader a report on their top 3 to 5 accomplishments for the week, their challenges that they had, what they did to solve these challenges, and their plans for going forward for the next week, and their self-evaluation. And then they have a 15 to 30-minute meeting with the team leader on discussing these accomplishments, maybe getting some coaching on solving the problems better, and then agreeing on or revising accomplishments for next week, and then agreeing on or revising that self-evaluation. And that all feeds into a broader promotion system. So that's a much, much better approach for a hybrid/virtual workplace. So that's the third step. Two more things. One thing is adapting your culture. You really need to shift your culture. So I mentioned that you don't want to transpose in-office work activities on that culture. You want to make sure that you have native virtual formats of interacting. And one of those will be digital co-working. On days when you're not in the office, everyone goes into a video conference meeting and they say what they want to work on for about an hour. And then they turn their microphones off, they leave their speakers on, and they can turn their videos on or off. And then they work and they ask any questions. They turn their microphones on to ask any questions that come up. That's a very connecting way of working and performing that helps get clarification on a number of issues. And that's a really effective way of adapting your culture to this hybrid model or even fully virtual model. So that's one thing. Another thing that you want to do in this context is you want to do virtual mentoring, where you want to assign a mentor for junior team members, one person from their team and one person from outside of their team. Especially important from outside of their team, because what research shows happens is that in a hybrid model or fully virtual model, people become less connected to the rest of the company, who is not their team members. They don't run into them in the offices and so on. So you want that connection to the rest of the company through that virtual mentor. And finally, you want to address digital discrimination. There's been a lot of research showing that things like, let's say, privilege cause people with minority status, especially women, to be much more interrupted in meetings, video conference meetings. And there's also various other forms of digital discrimination. So you want to make sure to address that. So that's the fourth point. The fifth point tied to culture is upskilling. You want to make sure to train your people to do effective hybrid work. They're not used to it. They don't know what it means. They've done some virtual work. They've done full-time in-office work. Hybrid work means things like really preparing intensely for that time that you'll be in the office, doing your individual tasks at home and doing preparation for team meetings at home, and then making sure that in the team meeting you can perform as well as you possibly can, because that's kind of your one time for, let's say that's 1 day a week, your one time to do collaborative tasks. Then you also want to make sure that you are good at virtual communication and virtual collaboration. I'm surprised by how few companies have invested into training their people on effective virtual communication during the pandemic. There was a lot of money spent on communication training before the pandemic. Virtual communication is very different than in-person communication. Companies have not spent money on that. And especially this hybrid dynamic where some people will be in the office, some people will be dialing into a video conference meeting. That's a very difficult thing to do. You want to train people on how to do that effectively. And the same thing for teamwork. People have been trained on teamwork a lot before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, virtual collaboration, virtual teamwork is very different than in-person teamwork. And there has not been training on this. So you really want to train people on effective hybrid/virtual teamwork. So those are the 5 areas of returning to the office that you really want to be thinking about.